American agriculture feeds the world. One American farmer produces enough food to feed 155 people. Agriculture provides jobs to more than 17 million people in the U.S. It's the backbone of rural economies and rural communities. But the world is changing. The industry will face new challenges. The global population is increasing. In the next 25 years, the population is expected to reach 9 billion people. Agricultural land is shrinking. By some estimates, we lose 40 acres of farmland every hour to development. Extreme weather events like severe droughts and flooding are becoming the norm. American farmers understand that healthy production is sustainable production. Protecting our soil, air, water, and wildlife means protecting our future, being prepared for the challenges ahead. In the U.S., much of the land in the lower 48 states is privately owned. The health and productivity of that land is determined by the decisions farmers and ranchers make every day. More than 100 years ago, a young scientist named Hugh Hammond Bennett recognized this.
As a young man, as a young scientist, yes, he was way ahead of his time in the way the farmers were treating their soils, which is not going to be successful over the long term.
He made it his mission to have that story told.
And he was there at a time when our land was really in big trouble.
His work set the stage for a new way of farming, one that considered the unique qualities of the soil, that used science and research to achieve maximum results with minimum impact, that puts sustainability at the forefront, linking conservation and agriculture together. This is the story of a conservation movement. It's the story of a nation recovering from disaster. It's the story of the foundation of a national agency dedicated to the needs of American farmers and ranchers and preserving our natural resources for the future. In the early 1900s, the Great Plains were considered the last frontier of American agriculture. Lush native grasslands held the promise of prosperity for farmers. Wheat was in high demand. Generous farm policies and a series of wet years created a land boom. New machinery meant easier and faster farming. Soils that had been covered and protected by grass for thousands of years were exposed to the elements for the first time.
There was the homesteading movement and the encouragement to farmers to plow up land that really should not have been plowed initially.
According to some reports, between the late 1800s and 1930, more than 100 million acres of land in the plains were plowed. By 1929, the erosion problem was getting more attention from lawmakers. USDA was given funding for soil erosion research, and Bennett was asked to lead the work. He jumped at the chance and began setting up experiment stations, soil research centers in the hardest-hit areas of the country. In October of that year, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression followed. Wheat prices plummeted. Farmers in the plains plowed up even more land to try to recoup their losses. When prices dropped further, many abandoned their fields. Between 1930 and 1935, 150,000 people moved out of the Great Plains in a mass exodus. From the Dakotas to Texas, millions of acres of native grasses had been wiped out. In its place was exposed soil. Soil erosion was now recognized as a national epidemic. Through the New Deal, funding was set aside for emergency soil erosion work. In August 1933, a temporary emergency relief organization called the Soil Erosion Service was set up in the Department of Interior. They would assess the needs on each piece of land and make recommendations based on what they found. Through demonstration projects in select watersheds, Bennett showcased how conservation practices could turn a farm around. This was visible proof to other farmers that these practices worked. As this work went on, the dust storms continued across the country. This period became known as the Dust Bowl.
So on May 12, 1934, everything that Bennett predicted in 1905 came true. One of the great dust storms occurred. From Montana in the north to Texas in the south, dust so thick visibility was limited to a few feet. There was a lot of concern in the Capitol and a lot of bills were filed. And one of the bills was to establish a permanent agency called the Soil Conservation Service.
There was a bit of a tussle between the Department of the Interior and the Department of Agriculture as to where it should be, and President Roosevelt finally made the decision that it would be in the Department of Agriculture.
The bill passed unanimously, not one dissenting vote, establishing the Soil Conservation Service in 1935.
The first Soil Conservation Act in this country or in any country.
And Bennett was put in charge of it.
In 1994, Congress changed the name of the Soil Conservation Service to the Natural Resources Conservation Service to better reflect the scope of the agency's work. NRCS's role in implementing conservation programs has increased, along with funding from Congress. Today, NRCS uses many of the same tactics that Bennett laid out more than 80 years ago.
Our mission has always been voluntary conservation, working with conservation districts to identify what are the local resource concerns, and it helps us to have that trust and to maintain that trust with the farmers, where we're always able to come out on their farms and help them meet their conservation goals on their land.
NRCS taps into the latest science and research and proven conservation practices to help them see results for their operations. This work is helping American farmers prepare for what's ahead, from systems that improve the health of the soil and water to restoring wetlands and wildlife populations. Through conservation, NRCS and American producers are helping to ensure the health of our natural resources and the long-term sustainability of American agriculture.